The trading station hung in the void like a jewel suspended in black velvet, and inside its metal corridors Kira walked with purpose, while her two dragons followed close behind their claws, clicking softly against the deck plates with each step. She had been avoiding this place for 7 years, but the credits were too good to pass up and her ship needed repairs that only the best mechanics could handle. And those mechanics worked here in this floating city between the stars where humans and aliens mixed freely in the pursuit of profit. The larger dragon named Ash kept his head low as they moved through the narrow passages because, even though the station was built to accommodate many species, his massive frame still drew nervous glances from passing traders and merchants who pressed themselves against the walls to let them pass. The smaller dragon called Ember was more curious than her companion, and she would occasionally pause to sniff at cargo containers or peer into open doorways, until Kira made a soft clicking sound with her tongue that brought the young dragon back to her side. Kira herself was dressed in practical clothing that marked her as a trader rather than a warrior, though anyone who looked closely could see the weapons hidden beneath her long coat and the way she moved with the controlled grace of someone trained in combat since childhood. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her pale skin seemed to glow faintly under the harsh station lights, and her eyes were the color of deep purple twilight, a sure sign of her elven heritage that no amount of cosmetics could hide. They reached the main market district, and the noise hit them like a wave because thousands of beings were here, buying and selling and arguing over prices in languages that ranged from melodic to harsh, and the air was thick with smells both pleasant and otherwise. Kira had goods to sell, rare minerals extracted from the poison worlds of the Outer Rim where most species could not survive, but elves had always been adapted to harsh environments, and with her dragons to protect her, she could venture into places that would kill lesser beings within minutes. She made her way to the mineral exchange where a Vortan trader named Grix had agreed to meet her, and the blue-skinned alien was waiting at the appointed spot. His forearms crossed in a gesture that indicated impatience. "You are late," he said in accented standard, and his voice buzzed with irritation. "Traffic was heavy," Kira replied smoothly, and she gestured to the crowd around them as Proof Grix made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort, and his eyes lingered on the dragons for a moment before returning to her face. "You have the goods?" he asked in. "My ship," Kira confirmed, and she pulled out a datapad that showed the inventory and assay results. The Vortan studied the screen carefully, and his expression shifted from skeptical to interested as he scrolled through the information because the purity levels were higher than anything currently on the market and the quantities were substantial. "This is acceptable," he said finally, "and we can do business. But I will need to inspect the cargo personally." Of course, Kira agreed, because she had expected nothing less. They negotiated the price for several minutes, engaging in the ritual dance of offer and counter-offer that was as old as commerce itself, and eventually they settled on a number that satisfied both parties. Though each pretended to be slightly disappointed, Grix transferred a deposit to her account, and they arranged to meet at her ship in 2 hours to complete the transaction. And as the Vortan walked away, Kira allowed herself a small smile because the deal would give her enough credits to repair her ship and restock her supplies with plenty left over. She decided to spend the waiting time exploring the market because it had been years since she had visited this station, and she was curious to see what had changed. And the dragon seemed content to follow her as she wandered between stalls, selling everything from weapons to exotic foods to mysterious artifacts from dead civilizations. At a tech vendor, she paused to examine a new model of navigation computer that boasted better accuracy in uncharted regions, and the human vendor was eager to demonstrate its features and explain its advantages over older models. Kira listened politely, but did not commit to buying because she preferred to research purchases carefully before spending her credits, and besides, her current navigation system worked well enough for her needs. As she turned to leave the vendor stall, she nearly collided with someone, and she stepped back quickly, an apology forming on her lips. But the words died unspoken when she looked up and saw his face. Ryan stood frozen in front of her, and his brown eyes were wide with shock, and for a moment neither of them moved or spoke, while the busy market continued its chaos around them completely, unaware the two people had just had their worlds tilted on their axis. He looked older than she remembered, with lines etched around his eyes and mouth that spoke of hard years and difficult choices. And his hair was shorter now, and touched with gray at the temples, but it was unmistakably him, and her heart did something painful in her chest. "Kira," he said, and her name on his lips after 7 years of silence was like a physical touch. "Ryan," she replied, and her voice sounded strange, even to her own ears. The dragon sensed her distress immediately, and Ash moved forward, placing his bulk between her and Ryan, while Ember pressed against her leg, offering silent support and comfort. Ryan's eyes went to the dragon's, and something flickered in his expression that might have been awe or fear or both tangled together in a complicated knot. "You have dragons now," he said, and it was such an obvious statement that under other circumstances it might have been funny. "I always had dragons," she corrected gently, "but you never knew about them because we never got that far." There was so much history packed into those words, so many conversations they had never had, and so many truths she had kept hidden during their time together, because revealing too much would have put him in danger. Ryan looked like he wanted to say something but struggled to find the words, and people were starting to stare at them, blocking traffic in the middle of the busy corridor. So Kira made a decision. "There is a HFY near the observation deck," she said quietly, "and we should talk somewhere more private." He nodded agreement and followed as she led the way through the crowd, with the dragons clearing a path ahead of them, because even the most oblivious trader knew better than to get in the way of creatures that could breathe fire. The HFY was quieter than the main market, and they found a corner booth that could accommodate both humans and dragons, and Kira ordered tea while Ryan got coffee, and for several minutes they sat in awkward silence while steam rose from their cups. "Why did you leave?" Ryan asked finally, and his voice was rough with barely controlled emotion. "Because staying would have killed me," she said simply, and it was the truth, even if it was not the complete truth. "The Alliance was hunting my people, and they were using humans to track us down, and every day I stayed with you was another day I put you in danger, and I could not watch you die because you loved me." Ryan's hands tightened around his coffee cup, and she could see the anger in his eyes. Anger at the Alliance and at the universe, and maybe at her too for making that choice without consulting him. "I would have taken that risk," he said. "I know," she replied, "and that is exactly why I left." They sat in silence again, and Ash laid his head on the table next to Kira's hand, and she absently stroked his scales, finding comfort in the familiar texture and warmth. "Are you safe now?" Ryan asked. "Safer," she said with a small, sad smile, "because the Alliance does not chase people who have dragons very enthusiastically." He almost smiled at that, and for just a moment she saw the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago before duty and danger had torn them apart. Ryan stared into his coffee cup as if the dark liquid might hold answers to questions he was afraid to ask, and Kira watched him carefully, noting the new scars on his hands and the way his shoulders carried tension like a physical weight. "What have you been doing?" she asked finally, because someone needed to break the silence that stretched between them like a chasm. He looked up, and something in his expression shifted from pain to resignation. "After you left, I stayed with the merchant fleet for another year," he said, "but my heart was not in it anymore, so I took a job with a salvage crew, and we worked the debris fields, pulling apart old ships and selling the parts. It was honest work, but Kira could hear the emptiness in his voice because she knew him well enough to remember his dreams of exploration and discovery. And salvage work was just survival with no room for wonder. "And you?" he asked, turning the question back on her. "I went home first," she said, and her fingers continued their rhythmic stroking along Ash's scales, "and I found my family's old territories in the Outer Rim, where the Alliance patrols rarely venture, and I discovered that elves and dragons have always been meant to work together." She paused and looked at both her dragons with affection that was clear in her eyes. "They found me, actually," she continued, "and Ember was just a hatchling, then barely able to fly, and Ash was young too, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and they were alone because poachers had killed their mother for her scales." Ryan's expression darkened at that, because despite everything that had happened between them, and despite the cultural differences that separated their species, he had always hated cruelty in any form. "What did you do?" he asked. "I killed the poachers," she said simply, and her voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. And then I took the dragons with me because leaving them alone would have been a death sentence. Ryan nodded slowly, and she could see him processing this new information and adjusting his mental image of her to include this harder, more dangerous version of the woman he had known. The dragons bonded with me, she continued. And it is not something I can explain in words because it is not like training, an animal, or even like friendship between thinking beings, but something deeper that connects us at a level most species cannot understand. Ember lifted her head from where she had been resting and made a soft chirping sound, and Kira smiled and scratched under the dragon's chin in a spot that always made Ember's eyes close in pleasure. They are family now, she said, and whatever else happens, they will always be with me. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was, "Careful, I tried to find you." He admitted, and for the first 6 months after you left, I searched every station and outpost I could reach, and I asked everyone if they had seen an elf woman with silver hair. Kira felt something twist in her chest because she had known he would look for her, but hearing him confirm it made the guilt she carried feel heavier. "I made sure you could not find me," she said softly, "and I changed my routes and used different names and stayed in places where humans rarely traveled." Why? Ryan asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice along with the hurt. "Because if you had found me, I would have come back," she said, and her honesty was like a knife between them, and coming back would have gotten us both killed. Alliance had informants everywhere, she continued, and they were offering rewards for information about elves in human space. And it was only a matter of time before someone sold me out. Ryan's jaw tightened, and she could see him fighting with himself, torn between understanding her logic and hating the choice she had made. "Did you ever think about coming back after things got safer?" he asked. "Every day," she admitted, and the words felt like they were being pulled from somewhere deep inside her. "And there were 1,000 times when I almost turned my ship around and came looking for you, but you did not," he said. "But I did not," she agreed, "because by then too much time had passed, and I thought you would have moved on and found someone else." Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Moved on," he repeated and shook his head slowly. "Kira, I spent 7 years comparing every woman I met to you, and none of them came close. And not because they were not good people, but because they were not. You." Kira felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall because crying would not change the past, and it would not make the present any easier. "I am sorry," she whispered. Ryan reached across the table, and for a moment his hand hovered near hers as if he was not sure whether touching her was allowed anymore. But then his fingers closed gently around hers, and the contact sent warmth racing up her arm. "Do not be sorry," he said, and his voice was rough, but his touch was gentle, and we both did what we thought we had to do. They sat like that for several heartbeats, connected by the simple touch of hands, while the CAFOC buzzed quietly around them, and the dragons watched with intelligent eyes that saw more than most people would have guessed. A server came by to refill their drinks, and the moment broke as they pulled their hands apart, and Kira busied herself adding honey to her tea, while Ryan stared out the viewport at the stars beyond. "How long are you staying on the station?" he asked eventually. "Just today," she replied, "and I have a cargo deal to complete and then some repairs on my ship, and I was planning to leave tomorrow morning." His disappointment was visible even though he tried to hide it. "One day," he said, quietly, "and after 7 years we get one day." Kira wanted to tell him that one day was better than nothing, and that she would take whatever time they could have. But the words stuck in her throat, because speaking them felt like making promises she was not sure she could keep. The truth was that seeing him again had awakened feelings she had worked hard to bury, and having him so close after so long apart was both wonderful and terrifying, because she knew how much it would hurt when they had to say goodbye again. "We could have dinner," she suggested carefully, "and there is a restaurant on the upper level that serves decent food." Ryan's expression brightened slightly. "I would like that," he said, and then after a pause he added, "Maybe you could tell me more about your dragons and what you have been doing all these years." Kira nodded agreement because talking about safe topics felt easier than discussing the complicated emotions swirling between them. They finished their drinks and stood to leave, and as they walked back toward the main corridors, Ash and Ember flanked them like guards, and Kira noticed how Ryan no longer seemed nervous around the dragons but instead watched them with curiosity and respect. He asked questions about dragon behavior and diet and intelligence, and Kira answered as best she could, though she admitted that much of what she knew came from observation and instinct, rather than formal study, because there were very few experts on dragons left in the galaxy. The afternoon passed quickly as they wandered through the station, and occasionally they would fall into comfortable silence that reminded Kira of their time together years ago, when words had not always been necessary. As evening approached, they made their way to the restaurant, and Kira found herself wondering if one dinner could possibly be enough, or if it would only make saying goodbye again that much harder. The restaurant occupied a curved section of the station's upper ring, where large viewports offered spectacular views of the surrounding space, and Kira and Ryan secured a table near one of these windows, while the dragons settled on the floor beside them, drawing curious looks from other diners. The menu was displayed on a holographic screen and offered dishes from 24 different worlds and cultures, and they spent several minutes browsing the options and discussing what sounded appealing. Kira ordered something called starfruit salad, with grilled protein from a world she had visited once, and Ryan chose a traditional Earth dish that reminded him of home, and they shared a bottle of wine that the server promised was mild and smooth. They waited for their food. Ryan asked about the poison worlds where Kira harvested her minerals, and she described landscapes of toxic beauty, where crystals grew in formations that defied conventional physics, and where the air itself could kill an unprotected human in seconds. The elves adapted to harsh environments long ago, she explained, and our biology can filter toxins that would be lethal to most species, and with the dragons keeping watch, I can work in places that would be impossible to reach otherwise. How do the dragons handle the poison? Ryan asked. They are more resistant than most creatures, she said, and their scales protect them from contact toxins, and they can hold their breath for hours if the air is too dangerous, and mostly, they stay near the ship and alert me if anything threatens. Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional comments about the flavors and quality of the dishes, and Kira found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected, because being with Ryan felt natural, despite the years and distance that had separated them. Tell me about your salvage work, she said eventually, and what kind of ships do you work on? Ryan swallowed a bite of food and considered the question. Mostly old military vessels, he said, and from the war about 15 years back when the Alliance fought the Kreth Empire, and there are hundreds of wrecks drifting in the border zones, and nobody has the resources to clean them all up. So salvage crews like mine get permits to strip them down. Is it dangerous? She asked. Sometimes, he admitted, and there are unexploded munitions occasionally and structural failures when we cut into damaged sections, and once we had a close call with a leaking reactor core that almost irradiated half the crew. Kira felt a chill at that, because the thought of Ryan dying in some preventable accident while she had been safely harvesting minerals with her dragons seemed unbearably unfair. Do you enjoy the work? She asked. Ryan shrugged, and his expression was hard to read. It pays well, he said, and the crew is decent, and it keeps me busy enough that I do not spend all my time thinking about the past. The unspoken words hung between them heavy, with meaning, because they both knew what past he was referring to. Kira reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. I did think about you, she said quietly. And even when I was trying not to think about you, I was thinking about you. Ryan turned, his hand palm up and their fingers intertwined naturally as if the 7 years had never happened. I know, he said, and I could feel it somehow, like there was still a connection between us even across all that distance. They sat like that for a moment, letting the contact speak for them, and Ember raised her head and made a soft crooning sound that might have been approval or encouragement. A group of drunk traders at a nearby table started arguing loudly about shipping routes and prices, and the moment broke as Kira and Ryan pulled their hands apart and returned to their meals. After dinner, they walked along the observation deck where the curve of the station provided an unobstructed view of the cosmos, and stars burned in every direction, like diamonds scattered on black silk. Kira pointed out constellations and explained which ones were visible from elven homeworlds, and Ryan shared stories about places he had visited during his salvage work, including a nebula that glowed with colors he swore could not be captured by any camera. They found a quiet section of the deck where few other people ventured, and they stood side by side at the viewport, while the dragons lounged nearby, and the station rotated slowly around them. I missed this, Ryan said softly, and not just you, but this feeling of being able to talk to someone who understands. I missed it too. Kira admitted. And there have been times when I wanted nothing more than to share something I had seen or experienced with someone who would appreciate it. They were quiet for a moment, and then Ryan asked the question Kira had been dreading. What happens tomorrow? Kira took a deep breath and tried to organize her thoughts into words that would not hurt either of them more than necessary. I have to leave, she said, and my ship needs to move on to the next job, and I have contracts to fulfill. And after that, he pressed. I do not know, she admitted, and I travel wherever the work takes me. And sometimes I am in civilized space, and sometimes I am months away from the nearest station. Ryan nodded slowly, and she could see him processing this information and calculating odds and possibilities. What if I came with you? He said suddenly, and his words tumbled out fast as if he was afraid he would lose his nerve if he thought too much about them. Kira turned to face him fully and searched his expression for signs that he was joking, but saw only serious intent. You cannot, she said gently, and you have your work, and your crew, and a life here. I could leave it. Ryan insisted, and I have savings and skills that would be useful on a ship, and I am not afraid of hard work or danger. Kira felt her heart twist because part of her wanted desperately to say yes, and to grab onto this chance for happiness with both hands. But the practical part of her brain was already listing all the reasons it would not work. The places I go are not safe for humans, she said, and the poison worlds would kill you, and there are other dangers, too, like raiders and hostile aliens and long stretches of isolation between stations. Ryan stepped closer, and his hands came up to frame her face gently. I am not asking for safe, he said, and I am asking for you. And if that means danger and isolation, then I will take those risks, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Kira closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, and for a moment she let herself imagine what it would be like to have him aboard her ship and to share her life and her work with someone who understood her. But then reality reasserted itself, harsh and unforgiving. The Alliance, she said quietly, and they are still looking for elves who work outside their jurisdiction, and if they found you with me, they would assume you were helping me evade their laws and you would be arrested or worse. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he did not pull away. Then we will be careful, he said, and we will stay in the outer rim where the Alliance rarely patrols, and we will only come to stations like this one where the authorities look the other way for the right price. Ash made a rumbling sound deep in his throat, and Kira opened her eyes to find the dragon watching them with an expression that was almost knowing. What does he think? Ryan asked. Kira listened to the wordless communication that flowed between her and her bonded dragon, and then she smiled despite her fears. He thinks you are brave and foolish in equal measure, she said, and which is apparently exactly what I need. Ryan smiled back, and there was hope in his eyes that made him look younger. Is that a yes? He asked. Kira took a deep breath and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. It is a trial period, she said, carefully, and you can come with me for 1 month, and if at the end of that time you still want to stay, then we will figure out how to make it work permanently. Ryan pulled her close and kissed her, and it was like coming home after a long and difficult journey. The next morning came too quickly, and Kira found herself standing in the docking bay watching as Ryan loaded his belongings onto her ship, while the dragon supervised with apparent interest. He had surprisingly few possessions for someone who had lived 7 years on his own, and everything fit into 2 durable cases that contained clothes and personal items, and a few pieces of equipment he insisted would be useful. The ship itself was a modified cargo hauler called the Silver Wind, and Kira had spent years customizing it to suit her needs with reinforced hull plating that could withstand toxic atmospheres and specialized sensors for detecting mineral deposits, and enough cargo space to make the long trips to the outer rim profitable. Ryan walked through the corridors with obvious appreciation, running his hands along the walls and examining the various systems and modifications, and Kira found herself seeing her home through his eyes and feeling a mixture of pride and nervousness. This is impressive, he said as they reached the bridge where multiple screens displayed navigation data and sensor readings. And you did all these modifications yourself? Most of them, she confirmed. And some I traded for with mechanics who owed me favors, and a few were installed by the original owner before I bought the ship. The bridge had 2 seats, and Kira had already adjusted the second one to human proportions, and Ryan settled into it, carefully testing the controls and displays within reach. "Can teach you the basic system," she said, "and you do not need to be able to fly the ship. But it would be good if you understood how everything works in case of emergency." Ryan nodded, and his expression was serious because he understood that space. Travel was dangerous, and that ignorance could be deadly. They spent the next hour going through the essential systems, and Kira explained the navigation computer and the communication arrays and the life support controls that kept the air breathable and the temperature comfortable. The dragons had their own space in the cargo hold, where Kira had built large platforms with heat lamps and comfortable bedding, and there was a separate area for feeding that could be sealed off to prevent smells. From spreading through the ship, Ryan examined everything with interest and asked intelligent questions that showed he was already thinking about how to be useful rather than just being a passenger. After the tour was complete, Kira filed her departure paperwork with station control and received clearance to undock, and she guided the Silver Wind away from the station with practiced ease while Ryan watched the process carefully. Once they were clear of the traffic lanes and had jumped to faster than light travel, Ryan relaxed in his seat and looked over at her. "So where are we going?" he asked. "A system called Theta 7, she replied, "and about 3 weeks' travel from here. And there is a planet there, with unusual crystal formations that contain rare earth elements, and I have a buyer already lined up." 3 weeks, Ryan repeated. "And that is a long time to spend in a ship." "You will get used to it," Kira said with a small smile. "And the time passes faster than you think when you have tasks to keep. You busy?" She put the ship on autopilot and stood stretching muscles that had been tense since the previous evening. "Come on," she said, "and I will show you the living quarters, and you can choose which cabin you want." The ship had 4 small cabins in addition to the captain's quarters, and Ryan walked through each one, examining the compact spaces that would serve as bedroom and office and storage combined. "This one is fine," he said, finally choosing the cabin closest to the bridge. "And it has everything I need." Kira nodded and tried not to feel disappointed that he had not suggested sharing her quarters, because she knew they needed to take things slowly and rebuild the trust that had been broken by their long separation. They established a routine over the following days, with Kira teaching Ryan about ship maintenance and mineral extraction and navigation, while Ryan took over cooking duties because he was better at it than she was, and also handled routine system checks that freed up her time for other tasks. The dragons adjusted to having Ryan aboard with surprising speed, and Ember in particular seemed to enjoy his company and would often curl up near him when he was working, and Ash remained more reserved but showed his acceptance by not objecting to Ryan's presence near Kira. One evening, about a week into their journey, they were sitting in the common area sharing a meal when Ryan asked about the bonding process between elves and dragons. "It is not something that can be forced," she explained, "and it happens naturally when both parties are willing. And there is a moment of recognition when dragon and elf see each other truly and understand that they are meant to be together." "How did it happen with you and Ash?" Ryan asked. Kira set down her fork and thought back to that day 7 years ago when she had killed the poachers and found 2 young dragons hiding in the wreckage of their destroyed nest. "He was hurt," she said quietly, "and one of the poachers had shot him with a plasma weapon, and the wound was deep and infected, and I spent 3 days nursing him back to health. During that time we communicated," she continued, "and not with words but with feelings and images, and I understood his pain and his loss, and he understood mine, and when he was strong enough to leave, he chose to stay." Ryan was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "And Ember?" he asked. "She came later," Kira said, "and about a year after Ash and I bonded, and she was alone and too young to survive on her own, and Ash brought her to me and asked me to accept her. It is beautiful," Ryan said softly, "and the way you describe it makes it sound like family." "It is family," Kira confirmed, "and family that I chose and that chose me in return." They finished their meal and cleaned up together, moving around the small galley with an ease that came from growing comfortable in each other's space again. That night, Kira lay in her cabin staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of her ship, and she found herself thinking about the risk she was taking by allowing Ryan back into her life. Part of her was terrified that history would repeat itself and that some threat would emerge that would force them apart again. But another part of her was cautiously hopeful that maybe this time they could find a way to make it work. She must have fallen asleep because she was startled awake by alarms blaring throughout the ship, and she jumped out of bed and ran to the bridge still in her sleeping. Close Ryan was already there, looking confused and worried, and Kira slid into the captain's seat and began checking the displays. "What is it?" he asked. "Proximity alert," she said, and her fingers flew over the controls, bringing up sensor data. "And there is another ship nearby, and it is not broadcasting any identification." "Pirates?" Ryan asked. "Possibly," she confirmed, "and or slavers or just opportunistic raiders who think a lone cargo ship is an easy target." She killed the alarms and began evasive maneuvers, while simultaneously powering up the defensive systems she had installed. "Can we outrun them?" Ryan asked. "Not at these speeds," she said, "and we will have to jump back to normal space and try to lose them in an asteroid field I know about." She executed the jump, and the silver wind dropped back into regular space with a lurch that made her teeth rattle, and ahead of them lay a dense field of tumbling rocks ranging in size from pebbles to small moons. Kira guided the ship into the field with confidence, born of experience, while the pursuing vessel followed at a distance, clearly more cautious about the hazards. The asteroids flashed past the viewport, sometimes close enough that Kira could see the pitted surfaces and ice deposits, and Ryan gripped. His seat restraints white-knuckled but did not make a sound. Behind them, the other ship was gaining ground, and Kira swore under her breath because they were faster than she had expected, and more skilled at navigating the dangerous terrain. "Wake the dragons," she told Ryan, "and tell them we might need their help." Ryan unbuckled and ran toward the cargo hold while Kira continued weaving through the asteroids, looking for any advantage she could find. A weapons lock alarm sounded, and Kira threw the ship into a hard turn that brought them dangerously close to a massive rotating asteroid, and the shot from the pursuing ship went wide and struck the rock instead, sending fragments spinning in all directions. Ryan returned to the bridge with both dragons following, and Ash's eyes were glowing with battle readiness, while Ember looked excited rather than afraid. "They are still coming," Ryan reported. Kira nodded and made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. "Hold on," she said, "and this is going to be rough." Kira aimed the silver wind directly at a gap between two massive asteroids that looked barely wide enough for the ship to pass through, and she accelerated hard while Ryan braced himself and the dragons dug their claws into the deck plates for stability. The pursuing ship fired again, and the shot grazed the rear shield, sending warning lights flashing across Kira's displays. But she did not slow down, and instead pushed the engines harder until they were screaming in protest. They shot through the gap with centimeters to spare on either side, and Kira immediately threw the ship into a spiral that brought them around behind one of the asteroids, where they would be momentarily hidden from sensors. The pursuing ship was not as lucky, or as skilled, and they hesitated at the gap, clearly unwilling to risk the tight passage, and that hesitation gave Kira the seconds she needed. She activated the cargo bay doors and looked back at the dragons. "Ash," she said, "and you know what to do." The massive dragon moved to the open bay with Ember following close behind, and Kira brought the ship around so that they had a clear line of sight to the pursuing vessel, which was trying to find an alternate route through the asteroid field. Ash launched himself into space with powerful beats of his wings, and in the vacuum his scales seemed to shimmer with an inner light. And Ember followed her larger companion, and together they flew toward the enemy ship like missiles made of flesh and fire. The pirates clearly had not expected dragons because their ship began evasive maneuvers that were panicked rather than tactical, and they fired wildly in all directions trying to hit the fast-moving targets. Ash breathed a stream of superheated plasma that melted through the enemy ship's hull plating, and Ember added her own fire to the attack, and within seconds the pirate vessel was venting atmosphere and spinning out of control. The dragons returned to the silver wind, and Kira closed the cargo bay doors behind them, and then she put as much distance as possible between her ship and the disabled pirate vessel before they could recover and call for help. Ryan was staring at her with a mixture of awe and slight fear. "That was incredible," he said, "and I had no idea dragons could survive in vacuum. They are more resilient than most people think," Kira replied, and her hands were steady on the controls, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system, and they can hold their breath for hours, and their scales protect them from radiation and temperature extremes. How often does this happen? Ryan asked. And the pirate attacks, I mean. Often enough, Kira said with a shrug. And maybe once every few months, and usually they back off when they realize I have dragons, but occasionally you get ones who are desperate or stupid enough to try. Anyway, Ryan was quiet for a moment, processing this new understanding of what life with Kira actually meant. Are you having second thoughts? She asked, trying to keep her voice light. He looked at her and his expression was serious but not afraid. No, he said. And I am just realizing that the life you lead is more dangerous than I imagined. But that does not change anything. Kira felt relief wash over her, because she had been worried that the reality of her existence would be too much for him to handle. Good, she said, and because there will probably be more situations like this. They jumped back to faster-than-light travel once they were clear of the asteroid field, and Kira set course for Theta 7, while Ryan went to check on the dragons and make sure they had not been injured in the fight. The rest of the journey passed without major incident, and they fell back into their routine of shared meals and conversations and quiet companionship, and Kira found herself growing more comfortable with Ryan's presence aboard her ship. When they finally reached Theta 7, it was a barren world with a toxic atmosphere and a surface covered in crystalline formations that glowed faintly in the dim light of the system's distant sun. Kira suited up in her protective gear, and Ryan watched from the ship as she and the dragons descended to the surface to begin the harvesting process. She worked for hours, breaking free the valuable crystals and loading them into containers, while Ash and Ember kept watch for any threats, and the work was hard and repetitive, but also strangely meditative. When she returned to the ship exhausted and covered in mineral dust, Ryan had prepared a meal and drawn a hot bath, and Kira felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the ship's heating system. Over the following weeks, they visited 3 more worlds and collected enough materials to fill the cargo holds, and Ryan proved himself useful in dozens of small ways, from maintaining equipment to navigating complex trade negotiations to keeping the dragons fed and content. One evening, as they were approaching the station where Kira would sell her cargo, Ryan asked if she had made a decision about whether he could stay permanently. Kira looked at him and thought about the past month and all the ways he had integrated himself into her life and her work. The month is not over yet, she said, but if you are asking what I think, then yes, you can stay. Ryan's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. Really? He asked. Really, she confirmed. And you have proven yourself capable, and you make me happy, and the dragons like you, and those are the only requirements that matter. He kissed her then long and deep, and when they pulled apart, Kira felt like maybe after 7 years of running and hiding and being alone, she had finally found her way home. They sold the cargo at the station for a substantial profit, and Kira split the earnings with Ryan because he was now her partner in every sense of the word, as they prepared to leave the station and head toward their next destination. Ryan asked where she wanted to go. Kira thought about all the places she had been and all the worlds she had explored and all the years she had spent searching for something she could not name. Anywhere, she said. And as long as you and the dragons are with me, it does not matter where we go. They launched from the station together, and as the silver wind jumped to faster-than-light travel, Kira looked over at Ryan sitting comfortably in the co-pilot seat and at the dragons resting in the cargo hold, and she realized that she had somehow assembled a family without even meaning to. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers and opportunities and mysteries waiting to be discovered, and for the first time in 7 years, Kira felt ready to face it all. Not because she was stronger or braver than before, but because she was no longer alone. Ryan reached over and took her hand, and she squeezed back, and together they flew into the unknown with 2 dragons as their guardians, and a ship full of possibilities, and a future that was theirs to write, however they chose. The stars streamed past the viewports in brilliant lines of light, and somewhere ahead lay new worlds to explore, and new challenges to overcome, and new adventures to share. Kira smiled and set course for the outer rim, where the Alliance's reach was weak and the opportunities were endless, and where she and Ryan and the dragons could build a life together free from the shadows of the past. The silver wind carried them forward into the vast darkness, and behind them the station grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among millions. And for the first time in 7 years, Kira did not look back, but only forward toward whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that whatever came they would face it together. The journey was just beginning, and the best parts were still ahead, waiting to be discovered in the infinite expanse of space where dragons flew, and love endured, and hope burned as bright as any star.